So when people were putting the states up, obviously the Chicago is a state plus Illinois was, I think, the biggest one. But I also saw Wisconsin, I saw some Minnesota, I saw some Indiana. And for the record, I have lived in all of those states. So I was actually born here in Chicago, but I haven't lived here since 1974, so I don't know if it still counts. But I've got family in the area. I'm in Minnesota now. I went to graduate school in Indiana, and I mostly grew up in Wisconsin, so I've been doing kind of a circle tour of the Midwest. But when Hadia, by the way, for the record, when Hadia first invited me to do this, and we had the conversation about paying the keynotes, I'd probably do the keynote for free, but if you want me to get on an airplane and deal with the air transit system, there's got to be some money involved. I'm sorry. So when Hadia picked this and her team picked this topic, I was super excited because I love this topic around the question of motivation. Because obviously, motivation's kind of complicated right now, right? We've all got people in on our teams or in our audience or things where motivation is kind of a rocky road for different people. And so there are things that we can actually do to help support this. I don't think as learning and development people, we are either solely responsible for people's motivation or can we change things that are probably impacting their motivation. So like, for example, if the incentives are vastly misaligned in the organization, it kind of doesn't really matter what you tell people in training. They know the deal. But there are ways that we can address this and there are ways we can talk about this that are maybe helpful perspectives to have when we're thinking about learning design. So which of these have you heard? How about we can't get our learners to pay attention? Show of hands. Yeah, that one's probably the most popular one. We want our learners to be self-directed. We got that one? Oh yeah, thank you, yep. My personal favorite, they're just lazy. Okay. Which always fascinates me when I hear that from a stakeholder, and I have many times. I'm like, really? The whole audience is lazy? Because I don't actually know that many lazy people. Everybody I know is so busy they can't see straight. And I'm like, how could you hire all the lazy people? And is it really a training problem? Maybe there's a hiring issue in there, I'm just saying. But maybe they just have more important things to do. Yeah, exactly, right? We kind of all have this problem right now, right? Competing priorities. There are two common elements that I see in every single behavior change challenge that we're dealing with, from personal stuff like exercise all the way up to whether or not salespeople are typing their call notes into the call record in the CRM. And the two things that I always see, one is delayed or absent feedback, and we'll talk about that probably a little bit more. But the other one is competing priorities. It's like I have to choose to do this in favor of doing something else. I have probably about 37 things I should be doing with every minute of every day. And boy, if you're not getting into the top 5 on that list of 37, it's probably not happening, right? So it's not enough that you come in at number 38, that you're on the list. It has to be much up closer to the top because nobody's got time to do all the things. But have you talked to them about it? Have you had the conversation with your people about why something's not happening? I mean, I think talking to people about why they're not taking their compliance training is not going to get you any new answers you haven't already heard. Pretty sure that one we know the real reason for that. But a lot of times when we're looking at this, there's good reasons. There's a concept in psychology called bounded rationality, which is this idea that people's choices make sense within the bounds of their understanding or their reason. There's always a reason for the behaviors. There's always a reason that something's not happening. So if somebody's not motivated about a learning experience or they're not motivated to act on the learning and kind of do these behaviors, there's probably something about the system. There's probably something about their situation. There's probably something that's set up that makes this a rational choice given the constraints that we're all dealing with kind of all of the time. So what motivation issues do you have? Like what, if you were like, if we could just get them to do X, what would it be? I want to hear from people. What kind of things are you I know I just set it up for like to make it bad if you complain about something, but I'm opening it up. You can complain all you want. What would you like your learners to do? Okay, if they could put ILTs on their calendar, if they could just register and actually show up. So there's like 3 things there, but yeah, okay. Use the resources we give them after class, absolutely. So if they would just, I had one once where I created this job aid for subject matter expert, and I was like, and I couldn't get him to do it. And once I finally got him to do it, I'm like, see how much easier that was? Yeah, so if they could just use the resources, absolutely. Appreciate training that's not micro-learning. Okay, here's my question about that one. Do you really care if they appreciate it, or do you just want them to do it? I mean, it could be that you really want them to appreciate it because it's an important topic and they should actually value it. Okay, okay. All right, I like it. Okay, what else? Log into the LMS. Yes, absolutely. If they would just log into the LMS, that would, yeah, solve a lot of, I don't know exactly which issues that is going to solve for you, but I can imagine about 3,800, of them.
Yeah, if their leaders would actually support what we taught them in the class.
Okay. So if leaders would actually support what they've taught them in the class, that is a great one, right? Because I think conclusively that, we know that that makes a huge difference. If the behavior actually gets reinforced once they're outside of the classroom, that's an enormous piece of it. Guess who also has 37 things that they need to be doing with every minute of every day, though? Yeah, so I've been trying to do this thing recently where I treat the managers as my secondary audience and kind of ask, what can I design for that audience to hopefully encourage the behavior? Remote learning be on camera. I will admit that for all that I know about behavioral science, I've not cracked that one either. And I do think there's some issues with the technology that are going to have to change, because that feeling of presence is super important. But the Virtual Human Interaction Laboratory at Stanford did a lot of research in terms of the cognitive load of being on camera all the time. And it's actually pretty high, right? More so than like sitting in a classroom. So it is actually cognitively more demanding. And part of it is people kind of keep checking their image and stuff like that. And so I think there's things that where the technology could potentially evolve. Will it? I don't know. But where the potentially could potentially evolve to make that easier. Like if people aren't feeling self-conscious about being on camera, they probably leave it on. But also people want to eat snacks and hang out with their cat and whatever. So I get it. But yeah, what else? Okay, discoverability. So finding the thing, like it might be resources, or it might be course resources or things. Yep. Okay. So being able to actually like expend the effort to find the thing. Okay, great. How about one more?
Reading instructions and CBLs.
Reading instructions and what?
And CBLs.
And CBLs. In computer-based learning. Thank you. I haven't used computer-based learning in a long time. I haven't used that particular acronym. Well done. So, okay. All right. So there's a bunch of these behaviors we would love it if people would do. And so how do we help support that, or how do we sort of encourage that as we go through? And one of the nice things, when I first started getting interested in this field, if you looked up motivation and learning, you pretty much got Maslow, right? And I, the evidence base behind Maslow doesn't hold up all that well, but it's interesting, right? The idea that we have psychological needs. So if I'm hungry and tired, I probably don't have a lot of energy. People need to feel safe. People need to feel a sense of belonging. People need to feel a sense of esteem. And then self-actualization is this, top of the pyramid. Of course, during lockdown, I saw this meme going around a lot. This one pretty much always works, right? But it turns out we have some other tools, we have some other models that we can take a look at that can help inform things as we sort of move beyond the Maslow pyramid. And we need to be specific about which motivation we're dealing with. Is it motivation to learn, to engage, to turn your camera on, things like that? Or is it motivation to actually do the thing that you're learning about, right? Whether it's a safety procedure, or whether it's recording comments, or whether it's something about health and wellness. How do we actually kind of move from beyond, hey, you're in this learning experience, how do you actually do it in the real world? One of the questions is, who are we trying to motivate? And I don't know how many people are familiar. How many people are familiar with the rider and the elephant metaphor? There'll be a few people. Okay, so here's how I explain this. So if you think about like kind of the different areas of your brain, some of the oldest brain functions that we've had the longest are things like the automatic stuff down by your spinal cord. It's breathing and heart rate and reflexes and things like that. And then we've got things like vision, hearing, language processing, kind of fine motor control, sort of gross motor control. Right in the middle of your brain, you've got the limbic system, which is like the amygdala and the hypothalamus, so it's emotional reactions, fight or flight, all of those kinds of things. But what it means is that a lot of your brain real estate is concerned with your like physical existence in the world. So how do you move stuff around? How do you perceive things coming in from the world? How do you feel about things? What's your emotional reaction to stuff? So a big swath of your brain is what Jonathan Haidt, a psychologist, refers to as the elephant, kind of the automatic, emotional, visceral brain. Then up here, we have areas like the prefrontal cortex, which tends to activate when people are making logical decisions, or exercising executive control, or impulse control, or planning for the future, or things like that. And so he kind of talks about how at the top of the rider, the top of the elephant, we have a rider, which is kind of a conscious, verbal, thinking brain, right? So both of these entities participate in decision making, and most of the decision models out there have this kind of two-part decision making. And I will tell you again, probably the third thing I see in most behavior change problems is when my physical environment is telling me one thing and my intellectual knowledge is telling me another. So if I go outside and I hang outside for lunch, my physical environment says it's kind of cloudy, but it's not that bad, and I don't need sunscreen. But my intellectual knowledge is no, sunscreen good, should be wearing it, right? But when these two things are at odds, that's where these tricky decisions start to come in. So we can say, hey, it's really super important for you to enter the customer records in the CRM, but you know what happens if I don't do that today? Nothing immediate, right? It's bad down the road, but there's no bad thing that happens immediately. And so we get that disconnect between the rider, which is like, I want to get to the next call, I want to move on to the next client, sell, and the elephant, and the rider that's like, hey, stop, take a moment, make sure you record this later because it's important for building your overall client relationship. So when we have these two entities, they sometimes disagree with each other. So the rider might be like, I'm trying to eat more fruits and vegetables, so I should order a salad. And I really should get this homework out of the way. And exercising now will give me more energy later. The elephant, on the other hand, is like, ooh, French fries, right? Or, hey, look, Celebrity Chef Deathmatch is on, whatever your TV, thing is. Or I'm just going to lie down on the couch for just 1 minute. And when you have a disconnect between these two, who do you think wins? Yeah, it depends, but when your alarm goes off in the morning and you live in Chicago, so it's dark and cold here when that happens, and you're thinking, I should totally get up so that I can, have some time to actually sort of sit and have my coffee and then, deal with the traffic or deal with the train or deal with reading my notes before I have to jump on that Zoom call. I should totally get up. What happens? Right? Yeah. The elephant is like, it is warm and comfortable and nice here right now. I think we should stay a little longer. So when we have this disconnect, and eventually you're like, okay, if I don't get up now, I'm really in trouble. Like then your rider gets to sort of harness the elephant and drag them along. But we have these decision-making kind of entities playing along throughout. And so one of the questions that we have is, how do we not just sort of give the rational argument to the rider, but how do we also bring the elephant along or convince them that no, this is really the good thing to do? So the rider thinks logically, it controls impulses, it plans for the future, which is super important. Our ability to project that into the future and consider consequences is something that as humans we're probably arguably the best at in terms of different kinds of animals, and we're still not that good at it. But we deal with this all the time. Should I save for retirement? Should I, you know, should I buy this thing now or should I wait and get something better later? You know, should I wear sunscreen? That's a personal challenge. I'll bring it up probably a few times. And it uses a lot of conscious resources. It's effortful to exert your rider. How many people have heard the idea that there's a limit to kind of our ability to pay attention to things? Yeah, what number have you heard? 8 seconds? Okay, the 8 seconds one, I have a whole spiel on it I'll happily tell you afterwards, but no, it's not 8 seconds, I promise. It's 8 seconds between like stray thoughts, but it doesn't always interfere with task performance, and it's also not shorter than a goldfish. Anybody heard 10 minutes? Yeah, that one shows up a decent amount, and there is some research to support it. What I actually think that 10-minute limit is not the limit of your attention, because anybody binged several episodes of something lately? Yeah, you can clearly pay attention longer than 10 minutes. However, I think if your rider is forcing your elephant to pay attention, that is an exhausting activity. And that's probably where this number, this idea of our shortened attention spans kind of comes from. How long can I force myself to pay attention to something I don't really want to pay attention to? Because, you know, you're watching TV, you can go for hours. Doing your taxes, I'm lucky if I get 10 minutes and then I want a cookie. So, and the elephant, on the other hand, is concerned about what's happening right now. So when I talk about bounded rationality, part of the decision making is this a good or bad thing for me right now? And the answer to compliance training is it's almost never a good thing for me right now. The best you can say about it is my boss will stop hassling me, or the L&D people will stop sending me emails about it. It tends to feel rather than things. How does this decision feel? It's impulsive and it's automatic. So if you've read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, he talks about systems 1 and 2, and it's not a perfect correlation, but they mostly correlate to rider and elephant in this case. So when we look at some of the kind of tasks that we deal with L&D, the question is always, how does this strike the elephant? So let's look at this first one. Salespeople need to switch from product-based selling to a consultative selling approach. If you were in a sales organization, I can pretty much guarantee that this has been a conversation in your organization at least at some point, right? Okay. What does the rider say about that potentially? What would a rider say about a switch to consultative-based selling, more relationship-based, that kind of thing? What is our logical conclusion about that proposition? Yeah, okay, it's more effort, but sure, it kind of makes sense, right? Elephant on, oh, yeah? Yeah, if I can make it easier, if I can make it a clear set of steps or something, that might help. How does the elephant kind of look at that statement? Yeah, the elephant's got its habits, right? It's got this sort of regular path that it's going along, and they're like, you want me to change? But what I'm doing is working for me, right? So, there's a disconnect there. Managers need to switch from an annual performance appraisal system to a quarterly one. What's the emotional reaction to telling managers that they need to do reviews 4 times a year? I think it's a sense of existential despair at a certain point, right? And you can assure them, no, it'll be easier because you'll be doing it more often and it won't be as big an update. And they will not believe you, probably, right? Okay. Project managers have access to a new risk analysis tool they can use during the project planning process. I have met some real project management wonks who would probably genuinely be excited about that. Like, I've met some of those people. I think a lot of people, though, or project managers are like, oh, I don't need more paperwork, thank you, right? So when we look at these kinds of things, these sorts of things that show up in, L&D departments and stuff like that, we're getting a very divided reaction between intellectually they can go, yeah, I guess it sort of makes sense. And their elephant's like, no, 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 no. Change is hard, change is effortful, don't like. So, so when we look at the change process, this isn't a perfect answer to it, but this is based on some research that's done out of the UK where they were looking at if we can target people, messaging to people based on kind of the stage of change that they're at, that we can potentially help them do things. So it could be that they don't know about the behavior at all. Like this is genuinely a new thing, it's a new program, it's a new technology, whatever. They genuinely don't know, they just need to learn about it. Okay, great. That is something we have all sorts of solutions for in learning and development. We can help with that, absolutely. But how about they know about the behavior, but they don't really get it, okay? So if we look at our AI adoption people, we clearly have a few people who are like, nope, or they just don't understand why it's important. Like, I hear you, and yet I'm kind of unconvinced. It could be that they get it, but they just don't believe you, right? I know you're telling me this is better. I know you're telling me this. I actively think you're wrong about that, right? It could be that they believe it, but they just have other priorities. There's our competing priorities again. I think that one pretty much always shows up. They prioritize the behavior, but they don't know how to change it, right? Okay, I know I should, exercise more, but I don't really know how to get started or what I would do or what works in this environment. Prioritizes, but thinks it's too hard. Oh, I should start exercising, but oh God, the idea of joining the gym or whatever is just overwhelming. Prioritizes, but isn't confident. There was an article in the Washington Post the other day talking about bringing back the presidential fitness test. Does anybody remember those? Anybody have to do it? Yeah, pretty much the response from most individuals is like, oh, just uniform dread, right? Because it created this like, you're always failing at exercise message that went out to many school children. I remember it very clearly. So, which, then kind of creates a less than desirable relationship with the whole topic of exercise. Is ready but needs help to start. They just need that handhold, that little nudge, that little tug across the line. Has started but isn't consistent, or has been consistent but is struggling to maintain. That's when people are starting to kind of fall, like, oh, I've been doing this really well for a couple of weeks, and now the habits are starting to erode. And not everybody goes through all of these steps. Sometimes somebody can be in 2 or 3 of these at the same time. It's not like a perfect continuum that people move through. But the interesting thing about this is what people really need at each of these can be quite different, right? So doesn't know about the behavior is learning is a perfect solution. But what about 2, 3, 4? What do people need there potentially? You've told them about the behavior. Could be leadership reinforcement, right? Somebody actually sort of creating an accountability system or saying this has to happen. What else might these people need? Yeah, education that fits with their paradigm or their situation. So it might be that they just don't understand the downstream consequences of their action. So it's not that you need to be told this is amazing. You need to be able to sort of see like, oh, here's what happens if I don't do this, right? Or it could be a persuasive thing. It could be we're really going to figure out how do we leverage things from marketing or advertising to kind of create a little bit of help with this, help understanding why this is important. How about 5, 6, 7, give or take? What might be helpful there? Encouragement, right? Yeah. This is where sometimes having that buddy, or having an accountability buddy or a coach or a mentor or something like that might be really helpful. Or something that makes it feel less hard, something that, really, really easy first step might be something that kind of shows up at that point, right? So like, let's make this seem less intimidating. I just started using the new map. I don't know if anybody's known. It's like healthy eating and stuff like that. And of course, anytime I use one of these things, I'm also obsessively analyzing it from a behavioral design perspective. So they're pretty good. I've seen presentations by the people, some of the research scientists that are at Noom and stuff, and they're very smart about a lot of this stuff. I'm like, okay, solid effort. Your home screen's a little too complex, but okay, other than that. How about number 8? How about that one? Sometimes you really just need somebody to come and be like, here, we're going to do it now, right? Some like, whether it's an appointment on your calendar or somebody literally like sitting down and going, okay, let's get started, something along those lines. 9 or 10, what might 9 or 10 need? Yeah, positive reinforcement, being able to see some benefits and understand why, why this is actually improving things. Feedback, yeah, feedback's super important right there, right? Mm-hmm. What else might somebody at 9 or 10 need? Like this is something they've been doing for a bit, but they're struggling. Structure, right? Yeah, it could be, there's the habit trackers. There's something that just kind of gives you some way to sort of see your progress or to kind of keep track of whether you're staying on track, things like that. Mm-hmm. Anything else? Yep. Had a partner, yeah. I think accountability partners and that social connect is kind of an amazing thing, right? Milestone rewards, right? Yeah, the feeling that you're actually like accomplishing things. It's not just, oh, I have to do this every day until I die, but like, oh, I've accomplished a thing. I've done it. I'm seeing some things. Yeah, no, I think those are all really great suggestions. So the model that we're going to talk about for the next 28 minutes, or give or take, is self-determination theory. How many people are familiar with this one? Oh, okay, nobody. I love that. I love that. That makes me so happy because we get fun things to talk about. Anybody read Drive by Daniel Pink? Okay, handful of people. So if you have read Drive by Daniel Pink, you actually do know this model because that's the model. And if you would like to learn more about it, that's actually a really good resource on this. But self-determination theory is Ed Deci and Rich Ryan. And they've done a lot of research into, there are a slew of motivation models out there. I find this one really useful, but it is by no means the only one that matters or the only one that we should pay attention to. But I think it's really useful. It talks about things that, needs that people have to feel are being met in order for them to really sort of fully participate. So people need to feel competent. They like to feel like they're decent at what they do, right? They like to feel a sense of autonomy, like they have some say or control over their environment or their situation or their job or any of those kinds of things. And they like to feel that a sense of relatedness to other people. So those accountability partners and things like that. So let's take a look at what these can look like. When we think about it, when we have a thing that we're helping people, what's the real reward? And I don't mean like, oh, if you finish this course, you get points in the gamification system or anything like that, or your boss stops yelling at you. I mean, like if people get better at an actual thing that we're helping them learn, the real rewards are things like a new skill or an ability. I feel more competent. I feel more able to do things. It could be a beneficial outcome. I see something positive happening in my environment. It could be that feeling of confidence or mastery. It could be that sense of relatedness, like I'm now part of the team that does this, those kinds of things. So when we look at those sorts of motivators, they can be useful things to think about. The continuum, which is full of big words, I always wrestle with should I use them at all, but it's their model, so I'm going to. Is a continuum of motivation that Deci and Ryan talk about. And some people are amotivated, right? They don't care. If it's their job to care and they don't care, that's maybe a hiring problem, But like there's lots of things where I'm amotivated about. For example, I am amotivated about getting better at basketball. I genuinely do not care if I ever get any better at basketball. And fortunately, the world does not need me to be good at basketball, so we're all in agreement on that one. But obviously, if somebody's amotivated about whether they're good at their jobs, that's a bit of a different issue. Sometimes the motivation is external. So it has nothing to do with the intrinsic nature of the task or anything that you want or value. Really, value is a better word. But it could be an extrinsic reward. It could be a threat. It could be a punishment. So you're going to get yelled at if you don't do your compliance training would be an example of an external reward, right? Or do this thing and get a gift card. That's also or an external punishment versus an external reward. Introjected is things that use guilt, shame, or ego. And that sounds bad, but actually it has its place in the conversation. So I used to work for a consulting company years ago, and they struggled to get people to fill out their timesheets. We had to get them in by the end of day Monday, and Tuesday morning, there was always like a certain amount of berating about not getting our timesheets done. And that was very competing priority. Why should I do this paperwork when I've got like 3 clients I need to call back that are urgent, right? But, and they toyed around with like a $25 penalty on the bonus if you didn't get all your timesheets in on time. Well, first of all, $25, not that compelling, sorry. Second of all, like the bonuses didn't ever get calculated or paid out until like months after the quarter ended. And so like we're talking about like $25 6 months from now, not a super big motivator. But at one point, Melinda, the person whose job it was to compile the timesheets, kind of stood up in a company meeting and said, look, this is all of the issues that I have when people don't get their timesheets done. And I will tell you, much better motivator for me than the $25. Because like, I don't want to be bad word, sorry, bad word here. I don't want to be that. I don't want to make my somebody in the company. She's a nice person. She helps me when I can't figure out how to do something on my expense reports. I would really like her life not to be worse. So when we're talking about guilt, shame, or ego, sometimes there's a place for that in terms of motivation. But these are still kind of extrinsic. They're kind of not about things that the person values themselves. Identified is they don't necessarily enjoy the activity itself, but they agree with the intent or the intent or the values. And so, for example, when I first started reading a lot of research papers and then putting them into presentations like this, I was like, ooh, my statistics are rough. I have not had a stats class in many years. And so I sat down and did some of the MOOCs and things like that. And it wasn't that I was like, ooh, I get to learn about statistics, although I am genuinely happy when I get to learn almost anything new. But the thing was, I wanted to be able to talk credibly about these research papers, and going and brushing up on my stats was a way to be able to do that. So that would be an example of an identified motivation. Integrated is like meaningful or a sense of purpose, right? It genuinely is something I care about, is something that, that you think is really important. And then intrinsic is enjoyable for its own sake. And this is moving more towards this intrinsic, right? Timesheets, never going to be intrinsic. Like, I don't know, maybe they'll come, maybe the AI will fix timesheets for us and then we won't have to be motivated at all. But if we can move things a bit to the right, it usually helps keep the behavior going longer. Because what happens when we remove a reward from an external thing? Behavior stops, right? Yeah, I have a very fraught relationship with Delta Sky Miles. And they've been steadily eroding the things that you get. Like I was just having a conversation with somebody about how I haven't gotten an upgrade at the gate in probably, 5 years or more or something like that. So the external rewards are going away, but I still have generally a positive affect about the company. Like the customer service is usually really helpful. And so that will keep me kind of booking those. I also live in a Delta hub, so I'm a little stuck. But a colleague of mine had a story about being on the West Coast, and they lived on the East Coast, and they flew JetBlue and they liked it, but then suddenly his wife's aunt died very suddenly and he really needed to get home in a hurry. And the experience that he had when they were helping, they were like, just go to the airport, we're gonna get you on a flight, don't worry about it. Like they didn't make him, jump through any hoops or do anything goofy, which other airlines do. And so that's a sense of, relatedness and motivation about that airline that, I just don't have with Delta. I don't dislike Delta, but I don't have this experience where they really helped me out in a difficult time. And so when we look at all of these kinds of things, people's, if you're further over on that motivation continuum, people will put up a lot. They will even sign into the LMS if they genuinely believe that this is important and value and all of those kinds of things. So let's take a look at this. How are people's hand washing games these days? Yeah, yeah. Okay, good. Still seeing some positive, right? Possibly like 5 years ago this time you were at your peak hand washing. Some people maintain a very high level of hand washing throughout their whole lives, and that's great. But if we look at things like, I'm kind of obsessively collecting examples of hand washing posters and stuff. So this is my example of amotivated, which is the letter that says, hey, you should really wash your hands. I don't think that does very much for anybody. But one of the big issues with hand washing is a lack of immediate consequences, right? So who knows, how clean are my hands? How clean do my hands look right now? Pretty good, right? Yeah. Clean enough for like medical or food service? No, clearly not, right? Okay. Who knows that though, rider or elephant? Yeah, it's a rider thing. It's germ theory. It's intellectual knowledge, right? Your elephant's like, I think it looks okay. I think it's all right. Yeah, exactly. The elephant is a teenager. It has an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, yeah. So, I was working on a hand washing curriculum, and one of the medical experts that we were working with was like, even I sometimes struggle at the end of the day. And I'm like, yeah, because you're tired, because you've been doing this all day long. It's a lot. Hand washing in healthcare is actually a pretty demanding thing. One study found that if nurses washed their hands as much as they were supposed to, they'd spend almost an eighth of their day hand washing, right? So it's not a small lift for people in kind of these things. But almost every hand washing curriculum you're ever going to see tries to address this issue of lack of consequences. Because what bad thing will happen if I don't wash my hands in a healthcare setting? Patient infection, right? How likely is it that I will ever know that me not washing my hands at 2 o'clock on Thursday caused that patient to get sick? Yeah, it's pretty much impossible in most of our modern healthcare settings, right? How will we know as a hospital that we have a problem, most likely, with hand washing? Mm-hmm. Statistics, right. Yeah, so our rates of infection are higher than like equivalent hospitals or something like that. So that's very riderly. Like elephants, as soon as you start talking statistics, your elephant's like, bleh. So almost every hand washing curriculum will have something like this black light or something to take this invisible thing and make it more visible and make it more real for people. I like this one. This is a YouTube video where they painted a patient green, and then you get to see where all the green paint goes around the clinic. I do not know how they cleaned up after that one. That one, I'm sure, was a fun shoot. But something that takes it out of the conceptual and makes it a little bit more visceral for your elephants. External things, extrinsic, rewards, threats. Employees must, right? Must wash hands before returning to work. I downloaded a compliance course off of the OSHA website at one point when I was working on a topic about this, and counted the number of times they said must or other kind of command words, and it was like 138 times in like 60 slides or something like that. So this is very much the compliance focus. And again, none of these things are bad in and of themselves. Like, we need to have rules, we need to have regulations, we need to have standards that we're kind of going towards. But if this is the only thing that you're relying on, it turns into, I will do it as long as somebody's watching me, right? Not, I'm doing this because I think it's a good thing to do. And one of the things we're looking for in motivation is we're looking for a sort of durability of the behavior. We want the behavior to not fall off the minute somebody stops looking at them. This is a hand washing example where they had treats for it was actually treats for going to the hand washing luau raffle and gifts. Honestly, like a reward for a one-time behavior is fine, right? Sure, yeah, give people a reward for a one-time behavior. It's the behaviors where people need to do it kind of consistently over time. That's where rewards get to be a problem, because people habituate to the rewards, and then you have to keep increasing them if you want to kind of keep perpetuating the behavior. So a reliance on this for a single event, sure. A reliance on it for everything. And, like extrinsic or external motivators, good things. Like, if people stop paying me, I'm going to stop coming to work. Like, I like my external motivators. However, again, we want some other things in the mix if we can. Guilt, shame, or ego. Where have your hands been today? What you touch stays with you. Possibly they did not mean it to be read in quite such an accusatory tone, but sorry, this one's a little bit blurry, but you get the idea, right? Like being like really leading on that. You really like this is a bad thing, and you should do better. Identified agrees with intent or values. This was a poster I found that the CDC put out for kids, and it was the idea that, hey, if you wash your hands, you get to be a baseball player or a doctor or a cook or a teacher. It might be a little distant for kid motivation. I'm not sure, but but nonetheless, that is an example of somebody using kind of an identified approach. We're not necessarily telling you why hand washing intrinsically good, but it lets you do other things. Integrated, this sort of meaningful or sense of purpose. This one has lead by example, wash your hands and teach kids to scrub hands for at least 20 seconds. And so basically what they're sort of trying to do is tie the behavior to your sense of values as a parent and the idea that you're a role model for your child, which is something I think a lot of people feel very strongly about. That's a very deeply identified value. And so if I can show you how the behavior lines up with values that you already have, then we're starting to get to this integrated thing. This one is also clean hands count for my patients. Your patients count on you to clean your hands. Consider whether your actions put you or your patients at risk of infection, right? So again, tying it to your sense of values and the reasons that you're a doctor and the reasons that you're in healthcare and all of those kinds of things. And then intrinsic, enjoyable for its own sake. This poster didn't actually exist. I had to make it. I still think it's worth a try, though. This is my friend Maria's idea, actually. I was complaining about not being able to find any intrinsically motivated hand washing posters, and she's like, oh, have it be a spa break. So I'm like, all right. And then we look at these various, relatedness, autonomy, and competence. So let's take a look at relatedness. This is from a research paper that looked at different ways to do hand washing campaigns within a hospital. So we have nurses who are actually in the hospital, and there is a thing where people are more likely to be kind of open to behavior if the people telling them about the behavior look like them and seem like they're part of their group and seem like people that they identify with. So that one, I think, is a really underutilized thing in a lot of learning and development is, can I see people who look like me or seem like me or have, kind of a similar thing who are modeling the behavior appropriately, right? Because, our elephants are really concerned with what are the other elephants doing? What's going on over there? That's a huge motivator for the elephant. Modeling the behavior, so having role models, depends on your affiliation about which role models are going to be effective. I don't think anybody in this room has really strong feelings about Boris Johnson, but I could be wrong. And when you look at, sorry, this is not a shameless plug, but when you look at a book review, you get several pieces, or book on Amazon, you get several pieces of information about it, right? I should swap this out for the elephant book, actually. You get the blurb from the author or the publisher. You get endorsements from people that the author probably knew and put the lead on to write some blurbs for their book. You get, now you get the AI summary, and then you get the reviews from presumably actual humans, although not always. Which one is most persuasive for your purposes? The actual humans, right? Now, of course, the whole system's getting hacked like crazy, but nonetheless, anybody do the thing? This is what I do, where you go and you look at the worst reviews first, just to see. Yeah. Okay, if the worst reviews aren't so bad, then I'll potentially entertain looking at the good reviews. But websites use this all the time. They always have people showing up saying, hey, this app is the most amazing thing, or I'm so glad I got this kind of life insurance, or whatever. And some of them feel really fake, but the ones that feel real start to actually have that persuasive ability. And I do think that that's something we don't use in a lot of learning design. Now, of course, it's problematic because then you're like, oh, well, those people left the company and we shouldn't use them anymore. But I do think it's something that's worth kind of having that conversation or effort of how can I show you? Because how many people have ever had taken any training where like the VP or the director shows up at the beginning and does a little inspirational message about the importance of this training endeavor, right? Yeah, and that's fine, but like, what do they know about your life? Right? We want to hear from people who actually know about our lives. Opinion leaders, testimonials, like success stories are really nice because it does double duty, right? Like it can be a positive feedback loop for the people who actually did the good behavior, but it also operates as that sort of social proof, right? Other people in my community or other people in my demographic are doing this, and these kinds of things can show up and help really kind of encourage me to do the behavior. Because a lot of times, like, you know, salespeople are very responsive to this. Like somebody else is doing that and they're having success with it. Tell me more, you know, that kind of thing, right? Versus you, trading person who has never sold never sold this product ever, telling me what I should do does not feel as compelling. Just gonna say. Social proof is, you know, things around like percentages, and they've used this for a lot of different behaviors. But the idea that like a lot of people are also doing this thing, that's been very positive messaging. Competence is an interesting one. It's hard to find a hand washing sign that's about competence. This is the closest I could do. This was in the Minneapolis airport, which says, wash your hands for 20 seconds with soap and water, travel confidently, right? But the idea that the thing that I'm encountering is telling me I could be good at this, right? That is, you know, not yelling at me about not doing stuff, but telling me how I can be more competent or have a greater sense of mastery if I get good at this thing. If I do this thing, here's the better and improved version of me if I can do this thing. And that's an interesting reframe. I was at least 3 of those categories on the how do I feel about AI, but I do think you can do some interesting things, like take a chunk of text that you're doing and say, rewrite it using competence as a thing and see how it comes out different. I'm not saying you have to use it, but it's interesting to kind of run it through some of these filters to see what would the language sound like differently if we were really emphasizing a learner's sense of competence in the way that we talked about this particular thing. Identity and values are very interesting to me. When I was working on one of these hand washing curriculums, one of the nurse practitioners said to me, it can be hard to wash your hands for 20 seconds. You all know this now because we've all been through it. But she's like, sometimes I have to think, I'm a good nurse. I can wash my hands for 20 seconds. Which was the clearest evocation of like values as a way to reinforce and motivate a behavior that I think I've ever heard. It was really, that's kind of amazing. And one of the things we can do is we can make sure that it's hard to change people's values. I don't really recommend it. It's a big, long, slow effort. However, you can talk about a behavior in a way that it aligns with people's values. So for example, like the environmental movement has struggled for a long time because they have tended to talk about environmentalism in a way that addresses true believers and not in a way that addresses people who are maybe not as already bought into it. So one of the things they did in Texas is, so somebody came up and actually asked me about this after talk. How do you change people's values about the environment? I'm like, don't. Show them how the behaviors align with the values that they already have. And there was an effort to do this in Texas. They were trying to create a campaign to target 18 to 35-year-old males who are statistically most likely shown to litter. And so they created Don't Mess with Texas, right? So if you're talking to an 18 to 35-year-old, like soft environmental Mother Earth messages, not so resonant. However, Don't Mess with Texas, now that's tying into your pride as a Texan and all of those kinds of things. And they got football players and country and western singers, and Chuck Norris did some, and things like that, where they brought in all of these people aligned to that group to say, hey, if you're a proud Texan, you protect your state. We don't mess with Texas. That includes throwing trash on the ground. So that's this really beautiful example of taking values that people already have and showing how the behavior aligns to it. It was credited with reducing litter significantly. Some stats say like 70%, but there were other things going on, so that's a messy number. But nonetheless, it seemed to have had a really big impact on littering in Texas. I really like these. These were done by the American Indian Community Health Organization in Minnesota during COVID. So overcoming adversity is a testament to our resiliency, be a modern day warrior, stop the spread, mask up, get vaccinated. And they're also just stunning, kind of culturally appropriate images and things like that. But this is something where it's like, you can be more powerful by doing these behaviors. So we tend to lean into like scare messages for a lot of this stuff instead of you can be powerful messages for things. And then the last one is autonomy, which is this idea of like who's in control, right? And compliance, by its very nature, tends to be the control is outside of you. You are not in control, right? And to a certain extent, that's necessary. We have to have this extra pressure when we're really trying to eliminate error from the system. So that tends to show up in places where there's a huge amount of legal liability or people could get killed or things like that. However, one of the questions is there any way that we can support people's autonomy in this, where they can make choices, they can be proactive about it instead of it all just being done to them? Atul Gawande, how many people are familiar with his stuff? He did like the Checklist Manifesto and things like that. This is a great book about, he's the medical writer for the New Yorker, and this is a great book of essays about improvement in healthcare settings. And he talks about when they were trying to deal with the hand washing in the hospital where he actually worked, the thing that ultimately moved the needle, they tried all the things. They tried enforcement, they tried campaigns, they tried all this stuff. The thing that ultimately moved the needle is they had focus groups with everybody in the hospital around what are your ideas for improving hand washing. When I say everybody in the hospital, I mean everybody. The janitors, the admin staff, the catering staff, all of this kind of stuff, all of the healthcare, all the clinical people, all of those things. And what they found was, of course, each group kind of came up with similar ideas. They didn't really it wasn't about revolutionary ideas, but the chance for everybody to kind of put their money on the table and say, this is what we should do, was probably the thing that really ultimately moved the needle for them. So one of the things that happens is I hear about this. How many people have ever encountered this where they're like, oh, the most experienced people are the worst. They're the most resistant. And yeah, getting some hands and some knowing nods and stuff. Well, if you think about it, the message is, hey, you who knows the most about how to do your job, guess what? That knowledge is kind of useless now, and we're going to force you to do it this other way. We're not going to ask you what you think of this change, or we're not going to involve you in the conversation of how do we propagate this change. We're just going to tell you that you need to do this thing. And it's not great, right? Like, it's going to a pretty deep place in people's sense of identity to be treated like they're a kindergartner who needs to be like forced into this new thing. Now, it's possible they are wrong about how they're doing it right now. It's not as safe or it's not as beneficial or whatever, but can you involve them in the conversation at all, right? Can they participate in, these are the goals, this is what we're trying to do, here, you with all of this knowledge about your job, how can you help us? And I'm not saying that's going to work with everybody. We know that person who's like, yeah. But trying to approach it in a way that people feel like their knowledge and their experience and all of the things that they've done are being respected in the conversation can make a big difference when it comes to motivation. We like stuff we make ourselves better. There's a research study called the IKEA effect, where people tend to value things they made themselves, as more valuable than the exact same thing if they didn't make it. So that can be part of the conversation. Even little things. I was talking to a guy who did coding classes, and he was talking about like the importance of documenting your code, for example. That tends to be something people sort of skip over. And he was saying, I used to have a slide at the beginning of the class that had all the reasons why it was important. And I just changed it to a slide that said, why do you think this is important? And I made the class tell me, and he's like, the whole day went better. Like, it just changed the vibe in the room all day long. If they were the ones who told me that it's important. So even that little switch of you tell me why this topic's important, and then all of a sudden we're having kind of a different conversation. So we are just about out of time, But these would be some of the levers that we're going to look at. I think I'm going to take one more minute. And so which kinds of strategies do you think this poster is using? Yeah, ego, shame, guilt, right? Which has its place, like I said, right? It's also really leaning hard into like that kind of visceral, like, oh, that's gross kind of, feeling, which again, kind of talks to the elephant. How about this one? Spreading germs is out, hand washing is in. Yeah, there's an ego component to this. You don't want to look like these dorky people. I'm not a big fan of like leaning hard into shame, but like I said, everything's got its place. How about this one? Love equals wash. Lose organisms very easily. Workers assuring safe hands. I think they got a little carried away with their acronyms, but okay. What is this one leaning on? Mm-hmm. Yep. So, this one's kind of the mastery and things like you can defeat germs, yeah. So think about which of these strategies might be effective things. Sometimes I'll just check through the list and go, okay, I have this behavioral problem. Which of these do I think would actually be helpful for it? And I think that's it. Oh, there we go. All right. And I'm on time, aren't I? Yes, I get a nod from Hidea. Yay! Thanks, everybody. I'm like the afternoon, so if anybody has questions, anything like that, let me know. I'm happy to talk about this stuff at great length because basically, I'm a big nerd.